Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Rainmaker Stories. Today, I have with me Aparajita Bharti, co-founder of the Quantum Hub and Young Leaders for Active Citizenship. Welcome. I'm quite excited to be having this conversation with you, Aparajita.
Thanks, Nishta, for having me here. And so good to see that your book has reached places. I've been following this conversation on LinkedIn as well. So super cool that I get to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Aprajita. And for my audience as well, so Aprajita and I go almost a decade back. We graduated from the same class back in 2010. And Aprajita, I recall that back in the day as well, you were so much interested in impact. So for you to become a co-founder of two organizations which are into policy, governance, and citizen engagement is such a natural flow. So kudos to the work you're doing and the impact that you're creating in the world's largest democracy, I would say.
Thanks. I think what we are doing is just a tiny bit of what needs to be done. But, it's great to be able to do something that we enjoy as well as create some impact in the process.
No points for guessing. My conversation with you today is, of course, going to focus on the policy aspects of gender equity and in different domains at that. So, with that, I'll just dive into my first question. So, we saw COVID bringing in a wave of hybrid work models. And we saw that not only organizations, but employees also, like the both employer and the employees gain from the hybrid work models. On one side, we have the cost savings which kick in. There is a huge war of talent today. So for organizations, they get access to talent irrespective of state lines. It gives you access to a much broader talent pool at more competitive prices. And of course, for the employees, it's easier because they can just manage their time better. There is less hassle of relocation. You save time traveling, a lot of those things. Now that COVID is out of the way, things are sort of normalizing. Do you see the hybrid work models are here to say and here to stay or not? And how can government and policies really help in embedding hybrid work models into our lives more permanently? Because we did see a lot of this giving a positive impact on the participation of women in workforce.
Correct. Thanks, Ishra. I think it's a very good and timely question. I just want to step back a little bit. I think first we need to think a little bit about who does hybrid work for, right? India is a huge economy. When we talk about women in India, most of the women are actually in informal sector. So to be honest, their ability to do hybrid work has not changed with technology. It is manual labor. A lot of it is in the service economy where they're required to be in physically. Of course, women in the formal economy, in service economy, information economies, where there is this opportunity to really think about how hybrid work can actually get more women in the workforce. So generally speaking, I think while yes, hybrid work has created a lot of opportunities, but again, if you look at the whole of India, still a very small population in that. Within that, I think the opportunity is great. Even I think Prime Minister Modi in August 2022, he was addressing a conference on with Ministry of Labor and Employment, and he also mentioned that female labor force participation in India is so low, and hybrid work can actually probably create options for women, so that they have more flexibility in their work timings, etc., so that they are able to be retained in the workforce. So I do think the opportunity is there. But as you rightly pointed out, just because there is an opportunity doesn't automatically lead to what best it can achieve. For example, one of the things that I think the pandemic really threw up is if women are working from home, then their unpaid care work, which is what the gender economists say, I mean, that's a word that we use, which is basically housework, also gets loaded on them because they are just seen around the house, right? So, how do we make sure that it doesn't become like a double burden in some sense that you are supposedly managing this and you're managing that? How do we change social norms around unpaid care work? that is something that we need to think about as a society, and government can also potentially play a role around that. Second, I think hybrid work also has many different types now. So, for example, we actually have been working on this policy brief that we are releasing later this month around work near space, home spaces that some state governments have started building. So, what they are doing is that in tier 2, tier 3 cities, they are kind of making co working spaces, which will allow ITES workers to work from the city that they are in instead of migrating to a megapolis. So, obviously, women sometimes do find it hard to leave their home, a city to, or home, whatever, village, to migrate to a bigger city. So that could also be one way of facilitating. It's still remote work. You are still going to an office, but you're not leaving your city. So there are hybrid work, remote work is also like a scale, right? So you can be somewhere on that spectrum. Right. And for different groups of people, different models would work. Right. So I think that is something that, we also need to be a little cognizant about, because I think sometimes what is happening in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore seems to be, what is happening, especially on LinkedIn. But that's not, our country is too huge, even beyond these three cities. So that also is something where state governments have a huge role to play, because they're creating that infrastructure in tier 2, tier 3 cities where women can come and work, or men, but basically they don't have to migrate outside their home city. And the third thing is that how do we sort of look at labor laws, around um, making sure that the rights of workers also are sort of protected. Earlier, of course, everybody used to go to a place. For example, we have prevention of sexual harassment. Applies in a workspace. But now, if the workspace is virtual, does that require some kind of change? Or if the workspace is a co-working space, so how do you, for example, create that internal complaints committee, right? Because earlier it used to be people from one organization. Now many people of many different organizations are working in a shared workspace. There are some changes that need to happen in the laws also that regulate. And the fourth most important thing that I do think, which we will see in a few years from now, is what does remote work do for women in leadership? Because yes, companies are allowing their workers to work remotely, but we also now see 1.5 years down the line that companies are also increasingly calling their workers back. Even ITES companies that had the kind of technology to monitor. So it should also not, in the long term, work as a detriment to women being in leadership roles if they continue to work remotely. So for that also, employers need to think what are the ways in which they get mentorship opportunities, they get networking opportunities, and that they are not sidelined if taking this benefit of remote work. So that is also something which is worth thinking about.
This just leads me to think you were so right to point out in the start, and this is something which I heard during my interviews for my book also, that okay, you're talking about a section of women who are urban and are a part of the knowledge economy. And we also, you're so right when you said that we are hardly, we are like, I think, less than 10% of the entire India. When you look at labor, you need to look at a much broader definition of it. And of course, when you talk of the hybrid model, you're right, it more applies to the knowledge economy part of things. But here again, Aprajita, as we rightly focused on the bit of that, okay, this hybrid model is not just for women. I think somewhere we need to make it gender agnostic. It's there for the workforce. So not to do that like, okay, I'll get sidelined because I'm choosing to do this. It should be more like, yes, this is like an interesting policy that is there in my organization. And if I'm at a life stage when I want to opt for it, I should not be penalized for it. Correct. And everybody needs to be motivated to sort of take advantage of it. Something similar to the parental leave, which many organizations are introducing. And now they're not calling it maternity leave. They call it parental leave, because they're like, irrespective of you becoming a father or a mother, you are welcoming a new child in the family. So take it if you want to. and they're introducing all of these newer policies, like the menstrual leave policies coming in, the parental leave is coming in. There is that when I was researching for the book, for instance, I was surprised to read that India already has 6 weeks of paid miscarriage leave, for instance.
Okay.
And we as the world celebrated, you remember the 3 days of bereavement leave on miscarriage when New Zealand passed it. It was such a celebrated thing all around the world. And I was like, wow, India already has it for over 50 years, yet we don't talk about it. So, what is your take about the urban set? Now, I'm talking about the organized sector here. What is your take about all these policies? And despite they being in place, why is there so much hesitance when it comes to their implementation, or people really taking the whole benefit of it? And you also work with, through YLAC, you work with younger generation also, you interact with younger professionals or students. Do you see acceptance of all these things? They're like, what's holding them back? Or do you see a change already there, that people are not associating some of these benefits only with gender, or they somewhere in their mind being a weakness? They're just looking at it as like, okay, like a normal policy which is there to support my life so that I can be a full throttle professional throughout my life milestones.
Right. So, Nishta, I think every policy, of course, has its own nuance. I think maternity benefit leave, because the kind of teeth that maternity benefit act has, in the organized sector, women typically know that they are empowered to ask for it, and they usually do ask for it. They also sometimes go into disputes with their employers. I think the problem happens in terms of the unintended consequences of some of these leaves, right? So, in the Maternity Benefit Act, basically expects employers to pay for the entire leave. Now, many countries actually, the leave is co-funded by the government, and also they give equal leave to men and women so that it doesn't become discriminatory in nature, like in more developed countries. In India, of course, we've chosen to sort of give it to, like the employers have this responsibility. I understand that we are not a rich country, maybe we cannot do it, but there have been reports which say that it has an unintended impact of women actually not being able to get jobs, because employers already at that time of hiring make that calculation that they may have to give it in the future. And what happens is that ultimately the most number of employment in any country, and a country like India, happens in the MSME sector. Right? It is not happening in the big companies. I mean, that's even a smaller population of that organized sector. SME sector, which has 10 employees, 20, 30, 40 employees, for them, of course, it becomes a very expensive kind of leave to have. So I think one of the things that has been proposed by some members of parliament is get a paternal leave as well, and make it equal, so that at least if we can't fund it, we at least take the discrimination out of question. Plus, it may also change some social norms in society, so that men also take more responsibility of childcare. Right. I think menstrual leave, again, the question is, who is, again, we have to think about who's paying for it. I have no problem, we can take as many leaves, but if you ask employers to pay for everything to be done for women without government support, it actually ends up harming women's entry into the workforce sometimes. So I think there has to be a balance. If we are asking for something, we also need to think of funding, because economic incentives trump any kind of gender sensitization program that anybody runs.
Right.
It is important to see what are the incentives of the employer, and how can we make sure that it does not have any unintended impact of getting women out of the workforce. And that's my fear with hybrid work also, that we don't, as employers or as private organizations who are allowing hybrid work, if we do not explicitly say that it will not impact promotions, it will not impact leadership opportunities, etc., what may happen is that women end up choosing flexible work more than men, just because of the social norms that we have. And then the impact may be seen in another 10-15 years that you see less women in leadership. They're already struggling with that problem. Okay. So it has to be made sure that whatever policies we have, they are suitably applicable, and employers have to encourage both genders to sort of all genders to take it equally.
Yeah. I think the communication bit is so important. Like you should say that any policy is basically equality is not dilution of quality at the end of the day. You need to make policies very gender agnostic that ways that these are, even when it came to the leave part of things that you rightly said, that maybe call it a parental leave, be it a man or a woman, you are eligible to take it if you're welcoming a new life into your family. Or when it comes to a menstrual leave, you can have equivalent to something known as a sick leave, or that well-being leave. People are now calling it that also, that no questions asked, every employee can take 1 day of well-being leave in a month, when you don't have to give a reason that why do you need this leave. Again, you're moving away from the gender aspect of things when you are terming these policies in a very gender agnostic manner. So that can be an interesting take for the organizations, of course. And this leads me to my next question, Aparajita, which is around artificial intelligence. We have so much of it which is being talked about today, and it is one of the important discussion points during the G20 summit as well. And we've seen there is, when it comes to AI also, there is so much of gender blindness that is being talked about. We already have, many posts that have gone viral in the past where they say, okay, Alexa being a woman's voice, like taking commands. It's like already cementing some of the gender stereotypes that are out there. Or there are some AI written algos which are already sort of working against credit scoring women, for instance, or some of the job applications are already getting negatively impacted just because the most of the people behind that AI do not have a very diverse background, or like less representation, not just of women but let's say different ethnicities as well. So what is your take on that? And since AI is something which of course India will also get on that wave, how can we get ahead of it in terms of policy regulation, or just talking about it to the relevant parties to make it more gender inclusive?
Right. So I think, Mr. Great question, and also very large area of research which needs to be done actually on this. I think it's just been dropped on the world, especially with ChatGPT. It's become too real. A lot of people are still wrapping their head around what it will do to our society. But I've had some thoughts around it. I think one is definitely, our design of many things is not gender responsive in the world, because traditionally, design has been seen from a male gaze, as they say it, or a male sense of this thing. The problem with AI is ultimately it is training on data sets. And data sets, because of the digital divide that we have in the world, and not just, I would say, in terms of gender, but also diversity. For example, you will probably have more data on American population. More percentage of people probably are online than, say, a developing country. So your training data sets are probably being trained on different populations and deployed in different settings. And the same case is also happening with men and women. For example, I think there was this image generation, this thing, and it had been trained on a lot of, I guess, search queries. And of course, porn is one of the most searched, things on the internet. So the kind of visuals that it was generating were actually quite sexual in nature, right? So the point is that we are not being super intentional about technology being gender responsive, and making sure that it, again, in our physical world already many things are designed for men, right? So at least in the digital world that shouldn't be the case. I do think the problem has been recognized, but unless the training set only doesn't become very diverse, it wouldn't be fixed on its own. So which is why I think a lot of universities are trying to pool in data from across the world, trying to make sure that it's more diverse. making sure that products are being made for specific kind of populations, use cases, etc. So a lot of work needs to be done on that. I think the other thing for us to think about generally in terms of AI is, so until now, AI seemed something, or it has been used by, big tech companies, etc., in their processes which are not customer facing. I mean, the outcome is customer facing, but essentially it is helping in decision making in the background. I think what ChatGPT has done is it has given AI in everybody's hands. It's really sort of made it something that anybody can use. All my team has ChatGPT open all the time. And now they've kind of made it a rule. If we have a task, let's first see whether ChatGPT, what can ChatGPT do, and then let's do something. Because sometimes it is at least, throwing up information that would have taken so much time to research, and then you can look deeper into it, etc. So people are still playing around with it. It's only been 3 months, 3, 4 months since it's come out. I think what we really need to think is that, it will take away some low skill jobs in knowledge economy, this type of function, and it will also improve because technology moves really, really quickly. And India is a knowledge like service based economy. ITES is very big. So coding, etc. Also, I mean, there are AIs which are doing quite reasonable first drafts of code. So we do need to think of where the next wave of jobs will come from. I don't think technology just like replace. I mean, usually all jobs are replaced by something else. They don't just die. But what will that be? I think we need to think. I mean, policymakers need to think about it, and we need to be ready for that displacement of workforce once AI matures, and look at what is it that, you know, what will be those sunrise industries where we can employ people. So
Right.
that is something which is worth thinking about. I mean, for men, women, everyone, I guess.
Yeah.
The country.
So just building on the AI bit of things and jumping onto the STEM, like science, technology, and engineering and mathematics area. So Aprajita, for instance, for my book, I interviewed Dr. Rohini Godbole. She's
Mm,
75 years of India's independence, but the only woman physicist to have been awarded an Padma Award. And
correct.
she shared a very heartwarming incident where she said, Nishtha, when I was back in the 70s, of course, when I was studying science, and I was very good at it and everything. And one of my mentors said that, yeah, I think the best bet for you would be to find a job in a women's college, that
Mm,
teach science. Or she was often questioned that, oh, I didn't know you're so serious about research. And when she went on to do her PhD in the US, she said, like one of my professors, and there was one of her classmates who was a guy, and he also had an option. So to her, it was said that no, we'll find a program for you in India only. And this guy, they were motivating him to go to the US and do his doctorate. So she said she was very sweet in saying, this may have been their genuine assessment of my ability, but looking back at it somewhere now, I feel maybe my gender did have a role to play here. And had I taken any of these biases to heart, India, like, I wouldn't have been the scientist I am today, and India would have lost a brilliant scientist at the end of the day had she really taken these things to heart. And when I further did some study into the numbers, even today, Aprajita, we have like STEM as an area is still, women are very underrepresented. We
mm,
are, in fact, India is a country where we have about 43% women who pass out as graduates in the field of science, which is on the higher side compared to the developed economies like US and Europe. But as we progress, when you go to the master's, doctorate, or even in the government sector, when you have all these heads of institutes or deans and faculty heads and everybody, you rarely find any women. So I know that we have had done some work in the STIP 2020 policy. But
mm.
what do you see? Do you see any change at the grassroots when it comes to the field of STEM? And by when do you think we can see more tangible changes across the hierarchy when it comes to this field?
Right. No, so again, very interesting question. We are actually doing a series of, women in future of work, in which we are doing a series of policy briefs around these topics, and one of them is women in STEM. The other one is on women in hybrid work. So you've covered both questions.
What a
Um,
timing.
in terms of STEM, so I think what is happening is, and this is not just for STEM, it's even in informal workforce we see there are some professions that are seen as male professions, and there are some professions that are seen as female professions. For example, I think in the generation before us, mostly women who were well educated, they used to go in teaching, and the reason for doing that was because it is only 8 to 3 or whatever, so you are back by the time your children are back, so timings therefore suit you. So everybody becomes a teacher, and it had got something to do with children. So society in general, and this women in STEM is a problem all over the world. Of course, in India we have it probably more than some other parts of the world, but it's a problem everywhere, that it's a non-traditional sort of sector where the expectation is not there to have women. When these kind of, so the research shows that once a sector becomes male dominated, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy also. First, women don't come because there's this perception of being non-traditional. Second, when it becomes male dominated, then women find it hard to thrive in those setups because they just don't find it very friendly. The workspace very friendly. They don't find that there is accommodation of any of the circumstances they have. Or, it just is odd. Like, if you're the odd one out in every room that you go to, it's just, you're just not comfortable. So I think this is what is happening right now with women in STEM. And I think this is where actually hybrid work, etc., can really help. Because the other, I was just listening on this conversation last week itself. There was a conference around women's labor force participation. So there was this co-founder who was, or founder who was speaking about how she really wanted to recruit women, and she's really focused on it. And yet, after so much try, she only has 5% women in her team, even though, like, for her, it's so important to have more women in the team, because a lot of women opt not to get into that field, because they are told by society that you'll have too many long working hours. Startup culture is like this hustle culture, because a lot of these new STEM jobs are in that. So there's no sense of timing, shift, work life balance, etc., etc. Biological clock is in complete conflict with your career clock. I mean, that's true for all professions. um, and then there are not too many role models as well. As you rightly said, that there's only one person in India who's, like, who's been awarded as the physicist. So where are those role models for women to also follow? So it's a chicken and an egg problem that we are kind of stuck in, which is why government is now really trying to, especially in terms of entrepreneurship, because obviously there's a lot of entrepreneurship happening in STEM, in the startup economy, really give the example of women entrepreneurs so that it inspires the next round of, or the next generation of women who are passing out from colleges to take up STEM or to remain in STEM. And companies also are realizing that they are missing out on talent because less women apply, and their teams become less diverse. Ultimately, if they are consumer facing technologies, then they need to have that gender lens also, right? If they are women users, so they appreciate that having women in the team is great. So a lot of organizations have started women in STEM recruitment programs. They are trying to find more women, groom them, sort of, give them mentorship opportunities, leadership opportunities, so that women connect with women and also are able to share the kind of challenges. So I think here both private sector and government have a huge role to play, so that these social norms change and more women feel comfortable in pursuing STEM careers. And I do think that this hybrid remote work can actually also push more women in STEM, because it gives you more flexibility in just in terms of timings, etc.
Actually.
So it will change, hopefully. I think I think there is recognition at least of it as a problem now, which is always a good starting point.
Yeah. And people, as you rightly said, that there's talk around it, and organizations are also now amped up in terms of, I think, maybe catching them young too, right? You tie up with colleges when you know, okay, at least till the undergrad level, we have women who are studying it. It's just that they're getting filtered out as they grow in their career. So when you catch them
Correct.
young, and you try to have those policies in place, I think this should improve the numbers for the generations to come at least.
Yeah. And I also want to add that, a lot of times, and this is something that we think a lot about. So when we run Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, we work with young people who are, I mean, in school right now, right? Like from the age of 13 to 17. We also work with college and young professionals. But in school, we run this thing called equality clubs. So what we do is actually we have instituted clubs in in more than 100 schools in India, and we speak about different types of inequalities in society. First, we start with gender, and that we get students to introspect of the small things, then which then add up to things like women dropping out of workforce, etc. And they do this through role play. They do this through thinking about their own lives. How are gender roles split in their household? Who takes what kind of decisions? And when they actually go through the process, it's very eye opening for them, because we take so many things for granted when we are growing up. And in fact, teachers have written to us saying that, oh my God, we didn't ever think about this in our own lives. We are so old, and yet we've never thought about why society expects some things to be done by women, some things to be done by men. I also think education has a huge role to play in aspiration building, because what you can be is a matter of self belief, also to an extent. It's obviously shaped by a lot of circumstances. You need to have a certain kind of privilege to be able to get better education, etc. But we are realizing, just in terms of numbers, that women are getting trained in STEM. Do they see themselves as primary bread earners? Do they see themselves as secondary or optional bread earners? Do they see themselves as entrepreneurs? Do they see themselves as CTOs? That is also a matter of aspiration. And therefore, I also think that a lot of things that we are discussing right now can also be solved if it's a part of school curriculum, because that is when you start thinking what you will be in life. And
This
it's so important to reach students then and tell them that this is possible. My mother, she teaches, she's just retired from a government school, and so she was in a girls school. She used to keep telling, so she's a maths teacher, she used to keep telling me that before I get into the syllabus, I just have an orientation with girls on like what is possible in life. And that is such an important dialogue to have, right? Also feel like some of us self select what we can do, what we can't do on the basis of the orientation that we have. So in that this entrepreneurial mindset training that Delhi government is doing, it's it's such a great thing, right? They are basically telling everyone that you can be an entrepreneur. So
This is so bang on, Aprajita. In fact, that was the motivation to include all the interviews in my book as well, because I started out in an investment banking. And when I
correct.
started out, you wouldn't believe, Aprajita, there were hardly any women who were at, those MD levels around me.
Correct.
So, and
Yeah.
we used to call them rainmakers. So that's why this title also came along. I was like, wow, can I be one for my company? Because I don't have any relatable role model who I can look up to. And of course,
Yes.
years of working, I switched to organizations after that. And then in 2019, when I was pregnant, I was like, oh God, like there is still so much gap that is out there. Hardly we know all the stats, right? Hardly 20% of women are in the workforce. 2 out of 3 women in India are only attending to domestic duties. And though as much as 38% enter the workforce, less than 3% are reaching to the C suite level. And I was like, wow, is that will that happen to me as well, despite having so much exposure? And I've been at par with the guys in our batch, right? I'm like, wow.
You were the topper. Where were the boys?
Yeah.
I can't
Yes.
remember. Yeah.
Let's call out our achievements too. Like I was like, I'm a gold medalist, and because of my gender, because now I'm becoming a mother, is that going to just overshadow everything I've worked on so far? And that motivated me to write this. And that motivated me, as you rightly said, interview the role models from different domains. So you have like a marketing person, you have a technology, a physicist, a mathematician, you name a field, and there is like a woman you can look up to being talked about in the book. So kudos to the work you're doing with these equality clubs as well. They are totally need of the hour, and we really need to integrate equality bit of things in the curriculum, so that children just look at themselves as individuals who can do whatever they want to, unrestricted by their gender. And this applies both ways. Even a guy who wants to go into, let's say, a performance arts or something which is otherwise looked at as more girly in nature, should not be the case. Let our kids just be kids at the end of the day. So this leads me to the last question now, Aprajita. We have had a very interesting conversation covering different domains. We're going to touch on entrepreneurship now. You touched on that briefly while answering the previous question. But I've seen, of course, there is so much focus being given to entrepreneurship, and India is being touted as that, next turf of, especially after Shark Tank 2, you see so much of education around entrepreneurship, youngsters getting into it. But the sad fact remains again that less than 3% of VC funding, for instance, goes to female-led businesses, or women are often limited to those, those woman friendly sort of areas, like, let's say, skin care and beauty care, or softer things like education sort of things, versus hardcore and at times more profitable sort of industries like, manufacturing or metals and mining, or even hardcore tech sort of things. And you've already briefly touched upon government coming out with different various schemes, or entrepreneurship related, women focused entrepreneurship related schemes and all. But do you see this has finally percolated to the grassroots as well? And if not, like, what more can be done?
So I was saying that yes, there's a lot of focus on entrepreneurship in general because I think there's a real need for job creation in the Indian economy. We are a young country. We can only really take advantage of the demographic dividend if, all our young people are productively engaged. And that is not happening at the pace that we would like to. And therefore, there's a lot of focus on doing entrepreneurship and a lot of focus on women entrepreneurship as well, because women actually, a lot of women are already entrepreneurs. They just don't know, or they just don't call themselves entrepreneurs. Think of, the tuition neighborhood auntie, the neighborhood creche, women, or the boutique, which is run by women, beauty parlors in every neighborhood are run by women. So there are so many of these nano or micro enterprises that are being run by women. They've never called themselves, like, entrepreneur wasn't like a cool word until this whole startup culture started. That is why the government has also really started focusing on tapping this energy of women, right? They're already kind of hustlers. They're already managing like 10,000 things in their life, and yet running something on the side, and supporting their families, etc. So generally, there's a lot of policy focus now on women entrepreneurs, and it ranges from literally this nano entrepreneurs to VC funded type organized sector or entrepreneurs, which is, I think, great, because you need all types in all geographies and all of that. I think within specifically VC funded entrepreneurs, I think the number is so skewed, A, because of this women in STEM piece, right? Second, entrepreneurship is genuinely hard. I mean, I'm also an entrepreneur. It takes away everything from your life, in the sense that you really have to go all in, for a few years at least. I mean, work-life balance is not a phrase that you even say to yourself as an entrepreneur. Forget about anything else. And of course, there are higher expectations from women at work, at home, and therefore they find it much harder to commit themselves to something that is so all-consuming in their life. So, there are lesser women who are pursuing entrepreneurship. Second, a lot of VC funding is going into STEM startups. Anyway, you have lesser women, right? So I think it's a mix of both things in that sense. And the third thing is that even if women do become entrepreneurs, many women don't scale their startups, right? So they don't kind of go full on in terms of, so they'll remain at the level of being an MSME, etc. So they sometimes don't have that kind of ambition, or they may not be in an industry that requires that kind of VC funding as well. For example, a lot of service based businesses, which are, I mean, for example, a lot of professional services type business like advertising, I see in consulting, in policy consulting, you will see that women entrepreneurs are there, but they don't require that kind of VC funding. Like I get messages all the time in my LinkedIn that, are you looking for angel investing? But my business is not dependent on angel investment, right? So I think it's a mix of both in terms of choice of first being an entrepreneur, and second, in which sector are they entrepreneurs, and therefore that. And the third thing is, how does VC funding happen? It happens a lot through networking and a lot through networks. A lot of networks, fortunately, unfortunately, right now are old boys clubs, because they've all gone to the same college. For example, like in India, there are a lot of IITians who are funding startups, but they only studied with mostly men when they were in IITs, right? So they very naturally meet more startup founders who were their batchmates, who would also be more likely to be men. So all of this has it all kind of spins off into something bigger, right? All small, at every stage of life or in every stage of economy, if you have inequality, then it snowballs into something bigger, which is what is happening with VC funding as well. Right. The another thing that some women entrepreneurs often talk about, a lot of entrepreneurship is about networking, putting yourself out there, stretching yourself, going into all these VC whatever meetups or networking events, etc., etc. That takes away their time from home also to an extent, right? So we also need to find ways, or VCs, I know that now there are VCs who are specifically looking at funding women-led startups, etc. So they also need to do a better job and make it easier for women to tap those opportunities. But also, I think it's a mix of industry, and when we solve that problem, this problem will also solve itself a little bit.
Automatically, true. I think, thank you, Prajita. This has been a great conversation, and we covered all aspects of it, right from the hybrid to STEM to AI to entrepreneurship. And I could beautifully see in all your answers how it's all interconnected at
Right.
some level. And at the end of the day, I think the message then boils down to let's debias things at a very young age, so that
Yes.
at least we put a level playing field out there for generations to come, at least, so that now we have like a all gender inclusive sort of a club that is out there in the world, and we just then fuel each other up in terms of whatever we want to pursue, we are able to, irrespective of our being limited by our gender, I would say.
Right. Sorry, if I can just add one thing. If there is another silver bullet to solving this problem of women in labor economy, it's probably building public infrastructure for childcare. Because most of the women, even if they enter the workforce, the break usually comes when they have children. Earlier, it used to come when you were married. I think that is now becoming a bit better, at least in metro cities. But children is, something, because we are moving towards more and more nuclear family setups. Not everyone stays in joint families. People migrate from their smaller cities to bigger cities to work, and they don't have that kind of childcare support. So countries across the world have invested in public infrastructure where they actually give quality childcare services which allow women to be in the workforce. So hybrid is one way that you are able to manage both. But again, there also, even if you have to come thrice in a week to office, you still need to leave your child somewhere, right? And not everybody has the luxury to do that. So I do think that there is some investment in infrastructure also required so that women can comfortably work. One is childcare, second is safety in our cities, because that also becomes a huge kind of detriment to women because they don't want to travel very far in terms of distances, and they don't take up certain kind of jobs which uh, involve a lot of travel, etc. And third thing is public toilets in markets and retail spaces. A lot of women are employed in shops and like salons, etc. And if your public space is not conducive to women, they are not being able to access it. So that is where government intervention is very much needed. I just wanted to say that.
No, that's actually bang on, Aprajita, and especially the first bit on child caring that came across in one of my interviews for the book also, where they said, mostly in India, we feel that, okay, as individuals, because we have unlike the developed world, we feel, okay, people can afford it or it's their personal problem, they can take care of it. So somewhere our organizations and the government also, maybe they have absolved themselves of this
Of
aspect
that.
as well. But it's very
Correct.
important because it is so unorganized currently that you're always, because as a working professional, even I find that, it feels like you're just one instance away from firefighting. Like if the
Mm.
nanny doesn't turn up on a day, so how are you going to do it? Because again, you're in a nuclear family, and if both the parents are working, like the father and the mother are working, who's going to take turns and what will happen? So you're bang on right there. We need some sort of a structured approach to solving for the child caring bit of things, so that
Right.
as women, we are not compromising on our careers.
Correct.
So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Aprajita. I'm sure most of our audience would also have so much to take away from this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Tishta. Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
me.
Aprajita. Bye.